Welcome back, everyone. It's kind of bittersweet. Starting this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at former President Jimmy Carter. He just recently passed away.
At the incredible age of 100.
Yeah, that's the longest-lived U.S. president we've ever had.
A remarkable life, no doubt about it.
And it feels like the timing for this deep dive is, almost perfect. We've been kind of keeping an eye on this Reddit thread, and it's just blowing up with folks sharing their memories and thoughts on Carter.
And it's so much more than just, remembering a president, isn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
There's something deeper here. It's like his story is making us rethink how we usually think about what a president's legacy is. So we've got articles, we've got this amazing online discussion. Hey, I guess you could say our mission here is to kind of go beyond the headlines, really try to get a sense of what made Jimmy Carter such a unique figure.
Definitely. And I think to really do that, we got to acknowledge this kind of the seeming paradox. Yeah, his presidency, a lot of people see it as troubled. But then you look at his life after he left office and it's earned him this worldwide admiration.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So let's rewind a bit. Let's go back to the beginning, back to his presidency.
All right, back to the 70s.
Right. One term. And from what I'm seeing in these sources, it was marked by some pretty big challenges.
Yeah.
So what were some of the biggest hurdles he had to deal with?
Just imagine this, right? You step into the Oval Office, ready to lead the nation, but the economy, it's in a slump, high unemployment, prices going up, and, an energy crisis.
Wow.
And then on top of all that, you've got the Iran hostage crisis. Americans held captive, the whole world watching. And as if that wasn't enough, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. Talk about a pressure cooker.
Man, that's quite a lot to handle. You almost got to wonder, how could any president make any progress with all of that going on?
Yep.
I mean, did he have any notable achievements during his time in office?
Oh, he did. And they were pretty significant. I mean, look at the Panama Canal Treaty, a major diplomatic win. It finally gave control of the canal back to Panama.
Right.
And then there were the Camp David Accords. This was huge. Carter brought together Israel and Egypt, helped them work out a peace agreement. It's something that still has a huge impact even today.
Yeah, for sure. The Camp David Accords, that's definitely a high point in his presidency.
Yeah.
But even with those achievements, it seems like history remembers his time in office as kind of troubled.
It's true, and the sources point to a couple of key things. First, you've got all those economic problems and foreign policy crises. Even with some wins, it kind of created this feeling that things were just out of control.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then there's Carter's leadership style. He was seen as more focused on doing what was right, what was moral, even if it wasn't politically smart.
Right.
And that rubbed some people the wrong way. And well, all of that kind of led to him losing the election in 1980.
It's funny, though. It's like the things that were seen as weaknesses during his presidency, this emphasis on ethics, not playing the political game so well, those almost became strengths once he left office.
Yeah. It's the paradox we were talking about, right? It's like as soon as he's out of Washington, D.C., this incredible transformation happens, almost like he was freed from something. And he just blossoms into this respected humanitarian, this advocate for peace and human rights. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's where the Carter Center comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone on that Reddit thread has some story about the Carter Center's work.
It's incredible, isn't it, the Carter Center? He started it with his wife, Rosalind, and it became this force for good globally. They worked on everything, promoting fair elections, tackling diseases.
Like what kind of diseases?
Well, they were really known for their work on guinea worm disease. In 1986, there were millions of cases, mostly in Africa and Asia. But by 2023, that number had dropped to just 14.
14? Wait, from millions to just 14? That's insane. That kind of puts his Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 into perspective. It wasn't just talk with him. He was actually out there making things happen.
Exactly. His dedication to peace, to democracy, to global health, it never wavered. And what's really fascinating is this passion for equality. It goes all the way back to his early days in politics in Georgia. He was big on racial equality then. It's like this thread that runs through his whole life.
So are we seeing a pattern here? Carter, the man of action. But it wasn't all, big speeches and international agreements, was it? Didn't he build houses with Habitat for Humanity even when he was like 90?
Oh, absolutely. It was about getting his hands dirty, being in the trenches. He even went to North Korea and Cuba, places that most people wouldn't even think about going, all to try and get people talking, to make peace.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't afraid to get involved, to stand up for what he believed in, even when it was tough. Speaking of putting himself out there, did you come across that story about him working on a damaged nuclear reactor in Canada when he was in the Navy?
You mean when he was exposed to all that radiation?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, it's an incredible story. He put himself at risk, suffered health problems for months afterwards, all to help make those repairs. It just shows how dedicated he was to doing what was right, even when it was dangerous.
It really does show a lot about his character. And hey, let's not forget about his push for alternative energy. Back in the 70s, he actually put solar panels on the White House roof.
A move that, well, didn't last, unfortunately. But it definitely shows how forward-thinking he was about renewable energy. He was ahead of his time on that one.
All right, so we've got Carter, the man of action, dedicated to service, not afraid to challenge the norm. But there's one more thing we got to look at. It's a speech he gave back in 1979 that seems to be hitting home with a lot of people right now. What was it called? The Crisis of Confidence speech.
Oh, yeah. That speech. It's kind of spooky how relevant it feels today, almost like he was looking into the future or something.
People on that Reddit thread are going crazy over it, saying stuff like, he was right, and why didn't we listen? So what was it about this speech that resonated so much?
Well, in that speech, he was talking about this growing crisis of confidence he saw in America. People were becoming too focused on themselves and getting more stuff, and it was hurting our national spirit, our sense of unity.
That's like he was diagnosing a societal illness.
Exactly. And he wasn't just complaining. He called on people to come back together to find a shared purpose and to recommit to those core American values.
And it's like that illness he was talking about. It's only gotten worse over time, hasn't it?
You could definitely say that. But what's really powerful is Carter didn't just talk about these things, he lived them. His whole life is focused on helping others, on reaching across divides. All of that was about living those values he talked about in the speech.
So it wasn't just a speech. It was like a guide for how to live a life of meaning, something he really embodied.
I think that's a great way to put it. It makes you think, did he know back then that his real legacy, the one that would really matter, would be what he did after he left the White House?
Yeah, maybe. It's almost like his presidency was just a stepping stone, a way to get to something even bigger.
Perhaps. But one thing's for sure, his story makes us rethink what really matters in leadership and service. And I think as we dig deeper into his life after the presidency, we're going to find even more stories and insights that are just as compelling as his time in the Oval Office, if not more so.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
And as we dig deeper into this post-presidency period, there's this one thing that really jumps out at me. It's Carter's faith.
Yeah, his faith was a big part of his life for sure.
Right. But I'm not just talking about religion, although that was obviously super important to him. I'm talking about this deeper faith in humanity,
Hmm.
in goodness, in the possibility of things getting better.
Yeah, you can really feel that, like, permeating everything he did. Whether he was, trying to work out a peace treaty or building houses, there's this undercurrent of hope, this belief that things could get better, that they would get better.
Exactly. But it's funny though, right? Because that faith, especially his Christian faith, it was sometimes seen as this political weakness.
Oh, you mean like that whole religion and politics don't mix idea?
Yeah, yeah. Like somehow being religious makes you a weaker leader, makes you naive.
But with Carter, it almost seems like the opposite was true. Like his faith wasn't a weakness at all. If anything, it was what drove him to serve others, to do what he thought was right.
That's such a good point. And it kind of makes you think, about leadership in general. Like, what role does faith play? Or even just a belief in something bigger than yourself? Can you really lead effectively without that?
It's a tough question for sure. But looking at how Carter lived his life, it's hard to say that his faith was anything but a positive force. I mean,
Yeah.
he really believed that we're all connected, that we've got to take care of each other, that love, and I mean like love in the broadest sense of the word, is the most powerful force out there.
And that's something that resonates with people, even if they're not, particularly religious themselves, even people who might not agree with, the specifics of Carter's beliefs, they often still admire how his faith played out in his actions.
Yeah, it's like his faith went beyond like doctrines and dogma and all that, and it became this universal language of compassion, of service.
Beautifully put. It's a good reminder that, at the core of any real faith, no matter what it is specifically, there's this call to love, to serve others, to make the world better. And honestly, that's something we can all learn from, whether we're religious or not.
Okay, so we've talked about Carter's achievements, his character, his faith, but there's something else about him that I think is worth exploring. His willingness to be vulnerable,
Huh.
to admit when he was wrong, to grow from his mistakes. We don't see that a lot, especially in politics.
Oh, you're so right. It's pretty rare to see a leader, especially a politician, be comfortable with being vulnerable. There's so much pressure to project this image of strength, of never messing up, and that kind of prevents anyone from, actually looking inward and growing.
But Carter, he didn't seem to have that problem. He was okay with saying, hey, I messed up, or I was wrong about that. He wasn't afraid to apologize. And he was always trying to improve himself. Like, he understood that being human means you're not going to be perfect all the time.
And I think that's what made him so relatable. So, well, human, we all make mistakes, right? We all have moments where we stir up, but it's how we deal with those moments that really shows our character.
And Carter always responded with humility. He was always looking for ways to learn and grow, never trying to hide things or blame others.
Right. He never pretended to have all the answers, but he was always willing to ask the tough questions, to really listen to what other people thought, and to change course when he needed to. That's real humility. It's recognizing that being a leader isn't about always being right. It's about being open to, learning and changing.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to see, especially in a world where it's all about appearances, about looking perfect. Carter was a good reminder that real strength comes from admitting your weaknesses, not hiding them.
And you know what? That ties back to his crisis of confidence speech perfectly. He wasn't just talking about America's confidence in its institutions or leaders. He was talking about our confidence as individuals, our confidence in ourselves, in our ability to face hard stuff, learn from when we mess up, and become better people.
Yeah, he was basically saying we need to be more self-aware, take responsibility for ourselves. Like, if we want to change society, it starts with each of us changing ourselves.
Exactly. Carter's life, even with all the ups and downs, the good and the bad, it's kind of like a roadmap for that journey. It reminds us that even when things are tough, even when we screw up or feel lost, we can always choose to learn, to grow, to be more compassionate and loving, to be more engaged in making the world a better place.
It's amazing, really. You have this guy, a former president, one of the most powerful people in the world, and he's telling us that real leadership isn't about titles or having authority. It's about how we live our lives every single day.
It's a message that goes way beyond politics. It speaks to something deeper, something that's true for all of us. And as we keep going here, exploring more of Carter's life after the presidency, you'll see how these themes, this service, this compassion, they just keep coming up in some really incredible ways.
It's really something, isn't it? When you think about all he did, both as president and actor, it's like he lived several lifetimes, all packed into one,
Hmm.
and each one focused on making a difference, on leaving things better than he found them.
And what's striking is how humble he was through it all.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the spotlight for him
Mhm.
or getting credit. He just saw where he could help and he did it again and again. It's really inspiring, to think about how much one person can do when they're driven by that kind of conviction.
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it,
Mhm.
about your own life. Like,
Mhm.
we don't need some fancy title or a ton of money to make an impact.
Right. We can all find ways to give back, to help others. It's really about leaving the world a little bit brighter than we found it.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to be these big, huge things. It can be volunteering in your community or
Mhm.
standing up for something you believe in, or even just, treating people with kindness.
Yeah, just being a good person.
Right. Every little bit helps. Like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
That's a good one. And it's like, in a world that feels so messy and divided right now, Carter's life, it's like this little beacon of hope,
It really is. He showed us that even when things are dark, when things seem impossible, the human spirit, it can still shine through.
Yeah. And he proved that love, compassion, helping others, those things can actually win out in the end.
A powerful legacy for sure, and one that's relevant for everyone, no matter who you are or what you believe in.
It is kind of interesting, though, how even some people who admired Carter,
Mhm.
they still saw his presidency as, well, as kind of a failure.
Hmm.
But when you take a step back and look at his whole life, I mean, his impact goes way beyond those 4 years in the White House.
Doesn't it? It really makes you rethink how we define success, Is it about winning elections or getting rich? Or is it about something more meaningful?
I think Carter's life shows us that real success is about living a life of purpose,
Hmm.
about having integrity, about serving others. It's about making a positive difference in the world, regardless of whether you get a pat on the back for it or not.
And that's such an important message, especially in a world that's so focused on, money and status. It's like he's saying, look, you can achieve all the worldly success you want, but if you haven't used your life to make the world a little bit better, then what was it all for?
That's a really good question, one we should all probably ask ourselves more often.
I agree. I think, as we think about Carter's life, it challenges us to really examine our own priorities, our own goals. What do we really value? What kind of mark do we want to leave on the world?
Those are really good questions. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter, I feel this sense of gratitude, for his example, for his service, for the hope he gave so many people. He showed us what it means to be a good human being, a compassionate leader, a true citizen of the world.
And he left behind a challenge for each of us, to live our lives with purpose,
Hmm.
to work for justice and peace, to never, never lose faith that things can get better. So I ask you, dear listener, what will you do to carry on his legacy? What seeds of hope will you plant in the world? Something to think about as we say goodbye to this extraordinary man.
Well said. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. Thank you for joining us on this journey of reflection and honestly inspiration. And until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep striving to make the world a little bit brighter.